Today's lecture will be on the sectional crisis. The sectional crisis refers to the period of intense regional tensions in the United States during the 19th century, primarily leading up to the Civil War. This crisis stemmed from deep-seated differences between the North and the South over issues such as slavery, economic interests, and political power. We will discuss these issues in two parts. The Fugitive Slave Act, passed in 1850 as part of the Compromise of 1850, was a piece of legislation that profoundly intensified the national debate over slavery. Its purpose was to satisfy Southern demands for more stringent enforcement of laws that would help them retrieve escaped slaves from Northern states, reflecting the South's dependence on slavery and its insistence on protecting what they considered their property. The act made it mandatory for federal officials and citizens in northern states to assist the capture of runaway slaves, turning even indifferent citizens into enforcers of slavery. This act contained several harsh provisions that undermined basic civil liberties, particularly in the North. Firstly, it empowered federal commissioners to decide the fate of alleged fugitive slaves without the right to a jury trial. Furthermore, these commissioners were paid more for returning slaves than for freeing them. A $10 fee for each slave returned and only $5 if they ruled in favor of the accused fugitive's freedom, creating a financial incentive that skewed the system against black individuals. The act also forbade those accused of being fugitive slaves from testifying on their behalf, leaving them entirely vulnerable to the whim of these officials. The consequences were immediate and profound, especially in northern cities with significant free black populations. Many free black citizens feared capture and wrongful enslavement, given that the law opened the door for kidnappers to abduct them and sell them into slavery. The law sparked resistance from abolitionists who saw it as morally abhorrent and a betrayal of the ideals of liberty and justice. It prompted increased activity along the Underground Railroad, a network of safe houses and supporters helping enslaved people escape to Canada, where US laws could not reach them. Figures like Harriet Tubman became icons of abolitionist movement, risking their lives repeatedly to bring others to freedom. Public reaction to the Fugitive Slave Act was fierce, particularly in the North. High-profile cases, such as the capture and eventual re-enslavement of Anthony Burns in 1854, exposed northern communities to the brutal realities of the law. Burns, a runaway from Virginia, was captured in Boston, sparking protest from thousands who gathered to demand his release. Despite the public outcry, federal authorities upheld the Fugitive Slave Act, escorting Burns to a heavily guarded procession back to Virginia. This episode brought the moral crisis of slavery into stark relief for Northerners, shifting it from a distant issue of the South to an immediate, tangible injustice in Northern communities. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 not only galvanized the abolitionist movement, but also forced previously ambivalent Northerners to confront the implications of slavery. By extending the reach of Southern laws into Northern states, the Act effectively nationalized the institution of slavery, creating a divide that would only deepen in the years leading to the Civil War. In the wake of the Fugitive Slave Act, Harriet Beecher Stowe's novel Uncle Tom's Cabin became one of the most influential works of literature in American history. Published in 1852, Stowe's book was a response to the injustices she had witnessed while living in Cincinnati, where she saw firsthand the toll slavery took on individuals and families. Stowe's objective was to bring the reality of slavery to Northern readers who might not have fully understood its cruelties and to humanize the enslaved, making them relatable and deserving of empathy. The novel centers on the story of Uncle Tom, an enslaved man of deep moral conviction and kindness, who suffers and ultimately dies at the hands of a brutal master. Tom's experiences and sacrifices reveal the dehumanizing nature of slavery and the physical and emotional abuses suffered by those in bondage. Another central character, Eliza Harris, escapes with her child to avoid being separated from him, embodying the strength, determination, and maternal love of enslaved women forced to risk everything to protect their families. Stowe's portrayal of these characters and their harrowing experiences resonated profoundly with readers across the North. The book sold over 300,000 copies in its first year alone, and its popularity extended beyond the United States, capturing attention in Europe as well. The novel presented slavery not as an abstract institution, but as a personal tragedy for those trapped within it, and it compelled readers to view enslaved people as individuals with families, emotions, and rights. The impact of Uncle Tom's Cabin on American sentiment was transformative. For many Northern readers, it served as a call to action, intensifying their moral opposition to slavery. The book sparked widespread public discourse, and Stowe became a significant voice in the abolitionist movement. Southerners, however, reacted with hostility, claiming that Stowe's depiction of slavery was exaggerated and unfair. They argued that the novel misrepresented the realities of the institution and painted Southerners in an unduly negative light. Uncle Tom's Cabin demonstrated the power of literature to influence social attitudes and galvanize movements for justice. It framed the struggle against slavery as a moral imperative, embedding anti-slavery sentiment deeper into Northern culture and fostering a groundswell of support for abolition that would grow even more fervent in the years to come. The political landscape in the United States was deeply affected by the Compromise of 1850 and the Fugitive Slave Act, and these tensions came to the forefront during the 1852 presidential election. The election offered a stark choice between two candidates representing parties that were increasingly divided over the issue of slavery. The Democrats nominated Franklin Pierce, a relatively unknown politician from New Hampshire who supported the Compromise of 1850. Pierce's campaign appealed to voters desiring stability, emphasizing the importance of preserving the Union and avoiding further sectional strife. His ambiguous stance on slavery allowed him to appeal to both Northern and Southern Democrats. The Whig Party, on the other hand, faced challenging internal divisions. Lacking a coherent stance on slavery, the party struggled to unify behind General Winfield Scott, their candidate, whose support of the compromise alienated Northern anti-slavery Whigs while doing little to secure Southern support. Scott's campaign was marked by a lack of cohesion, reflecting the broader ideological fractures within the Whig Party itself. Pierce won a decisive victory, and his election marked a consolidation of democratic power. This outcome highlighted the weakness within the Whig Party, which had traditionally sought to balance Northern and Southern interests. With Pierce in office, the South's influence in national politics grew, further entrenching pro-slavery policies within the federal government. The election of 1852 was a harbinger of the growing sectionalism that would soon transform American politics. It exposed the nation's deepening ideological divide, especially as the Whig Party continued to fracture under the pressure of the slavery question. As the Whig Party dissolved, the stage was set for the emergence of new political coalitions that would reflect the country's increasingly polarized views on slavery, leading ultimately to the formation of the Republican Party in the North. In 1854, Senator Stephen Douglas introduced the Kansas-Nebraska Act, a piece of legislation that would fundamentally reshape the political and social landscape of the United States. Douglas, a strong advocate of westward expansion and economic development, sought to organize the territories of Kansas and Nebraska to facilitate the construction of a transcontinental railroad. However, Douglas's proposal included a controversial provision. The issue of slavery in these new territories would be determined by popular sovereignty, allowing settlers in each territory to vote on whether to permit slavery. The Kansas-Nebraska Act effectively repealed the Missouri Compromise of 1820, which had prohibited slavery in the Louisiana Territory north of 36° latitude line. This decision infuriated Northern abolitionists and free soilers, who saw it as a betrayal of a long-standing agreement that had kept the Union together. By opening the possibility of slavery's expansion into previously free territories, the act further fueled the sectional crisis and set the stage for violent conflict. The immediate aftermath of the Kansas-Nebraska Act was an influx of settlers into Kansas, where both pro-slavery and anti-slavery factions sought to influence the territory's future. Pro-slavery advocates, many of whom crossed the border from neighboring Missouri, sought to establish Kansas as a slave state, while anti-slavery settlers from the north attempted to counter their influence. This fierce competition escalated into a period of bloody conflict known as Bleeding Kansas, characterized by violence, intimidation, and destruction of public and private properties. In May 1856, pro-slavery forces attacked the anti-slavery town of Lawrence, Kansas, destroying property and escalating tensions. In response, abolitionist John Brown led a group of followers where they brutally killed 5 pro-slavery settlers, igniting a cycle of retaliatory violence. These events became national news, capturing the attention of a deeply divided republic and symbolizing the extreme polarization of the nation over the issue of slavery. Bleeding Kansas was a grim precursor to the Civil War, revealing the depths of animosity between pro-slavery and anti-slavery forces. The violence and lawlessness in Kansas became emblematic of the broader sectional conflict, as newspapers across the country reported on the bloodshed and political leaders debated the implications for the future of the Union. The Kansas-Nebraska Act had failed to provide a peaceful resolution to the question of slavery in the territories, highlighting the limitations of political compromise and setting the stage for a broader national confrontation. The Kansas-Nebraska Act had profound political ramifications, leading to the collapse of the Whig Party and the formation of the Republican Party. The Whigs, who had long attempted to bridge the divide between North and South, could not withstand the pressures of the slavery debate. Many Northern Whigs who were opposed to the expansion of slavery found themselves alienated from their party, while Southern Whigs increasingly aligned with pro-slavery Democrats. This internal division proved fatal for the Whig Party, which dissolved in the mid-1850s, unable to offer a unified stance on the most pressing issue of the day. In response to the Kansas-Nebraska Act, anti-slavery Whigs, free soilers, and anti-slavery Democrats began to coalesce into a new political movement. This coalition formed the foundation of the Republican Party, which was explicitly dedicated to preventing the expansion of slavery into new territories. The Republicans argued that the West should be land of opportunity for free labor and free men, not a domain for the institution of slavery. Their platform appealed to Northerners who viewed slavery as both a moral wrong and an economic threat. The Republican Party's rise marked a paradigm shift in American politics. Unlike previous parties that had attempted to maintain a national constituency, the Republicans emerged as a distinctly Northern party, focused on protecting Northern interests and opposing the influence of the slave power. The party's focus on free soil and free labor attracted a wide array of supporters, from abolitionists to economic conservatives, all united in their opposition to slavery's expansion. By the late 1850s, the Republican Party had become a powerful political force, challenging the dominance of the Democrats and reshaping the American political landscape. Their success signaled the end of the second party system and heralded an era of political and sectional conflict that would culminate in the Civil War. The rise of the Republicans represented a new, uncompromising stance on slavery, and their opposition to its spread would become a central issue in the political battles to come. Amid the growing sectional crisis, another powerful social force began shaping the political landscape: nativism. The 1840s and 1850s saw a massive influx of immigrants to the United States, particularly Irish Catholics fleeing the Great Famine, and Germans seeking political refuge and economic opportunity. This unprecedented wave of immigration stirred anxiety among many native-born Americans, particularly Protestants, who saw Catholicism as a threat to American values. Many Protestants worried that immigrants could bring not only their religious beliefs but also foreign ideologies that would undermine the country's democratic institutions. The Know-Nothing Party, formerly known as the American Party, emerged in response to these sentiments. Their members earned the name Know-Nothings from their tendency to answer questions about their activities with the phrase, "I know nothing." The Know-Nothing Party's appeal lay in its ability to tap into widespread fears about immigration's impact on job competition, public order, and cultural values. Many native-born working-class Americans, particularly in cities, felt threatened by the growing immigrant population, especially in times of economic hardship. Know-Nothings argued that the loyalty of Irish and German Catholics lay with the Pope rather than with American democratic principles. The party's anti-Catholic stance resonated particularly in New England, where Protestant heritage ran deep. For a brief period in the 1850s, the Know-Nothings experienced remarkable success. By 1854, the party had secured control of several state governments, elected numerous congressmen, and became a significant political force, especially in the North. Their platform attracted disillusioned Whigs, particularly those who viewed the Whigs as weak on issues related to cultural and social stability. However, the Know-Nothings faced significant challenges when the slavery debate overshadowed nativist concerns. As the sectional crisis over slavery intensified, the Know-Nothing Party's anti-immigrant message lost its potency. Many northern Know-Nothings, especially those opposed to slavery, eventually shifted their allegiance to the newly formed Republican Party, which addressed the more pressing issue of slavery's expansion. The Know-Nothing Party fractured as it attempted to reconcile its anti-immigrant platform with a divided stance on slavery. By the end of the decade, the party had largely collapsed, having been unable to adapt to the dominance of the slavery issue in American politics.